I think we're a couple of minutes past the hour, and I think it's probably time to commence proceedings. Welcome, friends and colleagues, to today's event, hosted by professionals in international trade. My name is Bill Cole. I'm the chair of Professionals in International Trade, and I'm also a partner in an international trade practice with BDO. PIT is a national not-for-profit organisation concerned with international trade. Our purpose is to connect professionals through networking opportunities, strengthen members' international trade and investment knowledge, encourage cross-cultural exchange and strengthening of members' cultural intelligence, and to foster strategic business partnerships, build a community of international trade professionals. Within that framework and with that purpose, today we have a very, very rich and engaging topic, which from my investigations is poorly canvassed, both particularly in Australia, of course, but internationally as well, and that is the global momentum for the greening of trade finance and export finance. Before we commence, or before I introduce the speakers and the topic, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. Initially, of course, to the First Peoples. I'm sitting on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Victoria, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to thank the Swedish Embassy and the Swedish Export Credit Corporation for assisting us in arranging this very, very salient topic, and by assisting us in contacting Johan, who is our keynote speaker from Sweden. I'd like to thank the CBA, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, for making Adam Rowe available. And finally, I'd like to thank my own organisation, BDO, for providing accommodation for the presentation. So, first, in introducing our speakers, it is a very impressive list. We have, of course, start in order of appearance with Marion Schön, who's the National Director of the EU-Australia Climate Business Network. Marion has worked with us before on various climate-related issues, and her activities in coordinating Australian businesses to understand and align with various standards of environmental control and ESG concepts is well understood, and we welcome her. Next, I'd like to introduce and welcome Johan Henningsson, the former head of sustainability at the Swedish Export Credit Corporation. Johan has 16 years of experience in finance in various countries, including trade finance, and has made it a specialty to consider the problems of businesses in an ESG constrained world. Welcome, Johan. Finally, but not by no means least, Mr. Adam Rowe, Executive Director, Head of Trade Finance, Commodities, Trade and Carbon with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Adam has a lengthy CV, but suffice to say that Adam's push on carbon, ESG and green trade, if you like, is one of the foremost in the country, and we look forward to his commentaries on these matters. The topic today, I'll confess to everybody, in my reading and my understanding of what sustainable trade finance means, was quite a journey. I think it's true to say that most of the literature relating to this topic comes to a number of points. And the first one, in a world that's looking at carbon, climate change, etc., is that global trade in goods and services is significant. So it remains around 35% of global GDP. So in terms of an economic activity that needs to be contemplated under ESG conditions and ESG concepts, global trade is 1/3 of everything that happens. And as we know from the CBAM initiatives that were published by the EU about mid last year, the carbon border adjustment measures, various supply chain scrutiny and controls, there's a growing body of interest in limiting or identifying at least carbon influences in trade. That's the big picture. In taking it apart, as I've already said, various elements look at the production and investment in the production of green or black goods through investment and financing channels. Other initiatives look at the movement of goods between countries and within distribution chains. The next pieces of the puzzle really have really the only remaining categories left. So we have finance and we have digital. I'm not yet appraised of any efforts around dealing with the digital economy in terms of sustainability. I know, and all of you will probably be aware of the concept of Bitcoins. Indicatively, I understand that about 3 years ago, Bitcoin production globally equaled the amount of energy consumed by the entire Australian economy. So I will park the idea of digital probably for a later event. But here and now today, the remaining piece of the puzzle is finance. So trading goods and services are a key component of all economies. The next realisation in my research and agreements across various institutions such as the UN Environmental Programme identify financial institutions as being heavily involved in trade finance, banks, insurers, other entities. And the commentaries really usually lead to a conclusion that these entities are becoming increasingly critical actors in the promotion of sustainable trade through sustainable trade and export finance provisions. Particularly as nations move to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, there's an important role for transition in the banking industry to help achieve them. So it's generally recognised globally in the literature and in certain policies that it is a fundamental part of transition that finance be directed appropriately and or penalties for not doing so. But the final crystallisation that I've taken from my research also comes to a similar conclusion across a number of sources. For instance, the Banking and Finance Council, and that is that the difficulty in defining workable sustainability standards for international trade is difficult. It has not been achieved, and the effort involved should not be underestimated. So we have a number of parameters now for our discussion today from my perspective. What is it in terms of standards? How hard is it? And how much effort will we need to put in order to achieve it? I would add another one that, and I've already in our briefings mentioned this to Johan, that I am particularly interested in the plight of SMEs versus scale businesses. So hopefully we'll hear from that. I won't take any more time on the introduction of the topic. As you can see, I've had a bit of a confusing and wide-ranging scrutiny of the literature. Everybody agrees that nobody agrees. And obviously, going forward, we need to do so. On that note, I will hand over to Marion Schön, National Director of the EU-Australia Climate Business Network, to make her comments from her perspective and the EU's policy settings on the topic. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you, Bill, and a warm welcome from me too, for everyone joining us today. We're delighted to be co-presenting this webinar with the professionals in trade. This is part of an EU-supported initiative to share knowledge on sustainability policy and industry practice between the European Union and Australia as part of supporting the transition to a net zero economy. And as mentioned, it's very timely to have this discussion. The intersection between sustainable finance and trade is increasing. And I'd like to, just as a bit of context, mention some of the actions that are part of the European Green Deal, which sets out the EU's ambition to become climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce carbon emissions by at least 55% by 2030. The policy areas to transform capital within the EU have particular implications for global and Australian finance and trade. These include setting up a very comprehensive set of policies as part of a sustainable finance framework, which is now the basis on which larger EU companies and financial institutions must report and disclose to their investors and their consumers on the sustainability of the activities that they're financing or investing in. And this is part of a wider strategy to drive sustainable investment. To be classified as sustainable, activities under the EU taxonomy must be substantially contribute to or do no significant harm to environmental objectives such as climate change mitigation, climate adaptation, transition to a circular economy, the protection of biodiversity, pollution prevention, the sustainable use of water and marine resources, and other social objectives such as labour rights. Companies established or doing business in the EU are further required now to report annually on their social and environmental risks and on their supply chain due diligence in relation to human rights and environmental impacts such as deforestation in their supply chains. And of course, this is all against the background that the EU Free Trade Agreement is expected, the EU-Australia Free Trade Agreement is expected to be concluded later in the year. There are some other trade-related initiatives. Since revising its strategy in February last year, sustainability is now at the heart of EU trade policy. Trade agreements are seen as a mechanism to increase the climate ambition of its trading partners and to engage them on elements of the Green Deal, such as biodiversity, sustainable food production, and the circular economy. And as Bill mentioned, a further trade-related initiative proposed last year was the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which will impose charges at the border for goods such as cement, steel, aluminium, and fertiliser, proportionate to the carbon emitted during its production. So while the EU and other governments are developing a growing number of climate sustainable finance initiatives to address climate change and social issues, the definitions and frameworks of the sustainable finance industry are often not easily applied to the financing of trade. There are more parties involved, and entire supply chains must be monitored, which make trade finance inherently more complicated. Single transactions can often involve 20 parties with different types of goods, services, and raw materials which cross multiple jurisdictions and forms of transport, and banks and companies often assess sustainability in different ways. So with that brief background, it's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, who comes to us early in the morning from Stockholm. Johan Henningsson is the sustainability strategist at the Swedish Export Credit Corporation. He's previously been the head of sustainability and has 16 years of financial and management experience in the banking and private sectors with organisations like ABN AMRO and the global technology company ABB. And he's also currently undertaking research on sustainable finance. Johan will share with us the ways in which the Swedish Public Export Credit Bank is becoming climate neutral and aligning its investment portfolio with the Paris Agreement. So over to you, Johan.
Thank you so much, Marianne and Bill, and thank you for having me on this to discuss this very important issue. I think, as you know, and as has been mentioned, EU is moving quite fast, and I will talk about export financing today, and that's one part of trade financing, but very important. And Bill mentioned before that trade finance is about a third of the global GDP. And for Sweden, exports is 50%, more than 50% of our GDP. So export financing is very important for us. Maybe I don't know if my presentation is that up? I can't see my presentation there. Excellent, excellent. So I would like to share with you today climate finance and the Swedish experience of that. And we have been working quite a lot. And we have huge pressure from the Swedish government, but also within all the new types of regulations that will affect us coming up in the EU. And basically, you can say that the EU has made finance a driver for change. So the finance sector will come first, and then rules will be applied for corporates to follow. And then the pressure will come from the finance sector and the regulation at the same time. So there will be a real shift for companies going forward. And the taxonomy is just one example of that, and that will definitely affect trade financing as well. So I will share a few slides with you today, and that's a couple of slides that we actually shared within a new initiative, a coalition that was formed following the Glasgow meetings, and that is E3F. It is called. It's Export Finance for the Future. It's 7 countries that have gathered. It's Denmark, Sweden, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and United Kingdom to share experiences and progress together. And the meetings are at the CEO level of all these countries' export finance institutions. So this is a presentation that we made in that context. So just before I start, I'd like to also inform you that the Swedish export system constitutes of 2 organizations. I represent the Swedish Exportkredit Corporation. That is a state-owned bank. And we fund ourselves in the capital markets globally. And then we have EKN, that's the Export Credit Guarantee Board, and that's an agency, and they provide guarantees. And together we are the Swedish export credit system, or the Swedish export financing system. And I represent both today. And we have lending in about more than 100 countries. So you can imagine how important that is for the Swedish exports. Next slide, please. Excellent. So we have been working with climate finance for quite a while, but in 2019, the Swedish government gave us an assignment, actually, to become climate neutral. And that was late 2019. So during the first half of 2020, EKN and SEK together worked on a roadmap to actually do that. And we came up with, I think, around 10 different things that we will do. And the 4 most important things that we sort of presented for the government, the Swedish government, to be sort of able to actually be part of the country, the Swedish country's ambition to become climate neutral in 2045. We put up with restrictions on fossil fuel lendings. We're phasing out that. We will also create a green export credit. I think a little bit ahead. We will increase our transparency in the Swedish export credit system and make a climate report together jointly to actually both disclose the system, sort of the financed emissions that we have, but also how the the climate sort of transition will affect us financially. So both two perspectives on climate. And then we set up a scientific climate council, and I will tell you a little bit more about that later. Next slide, please. So we realized that sort of moving away from fossil fuel is one thing, and in sort of sustainable trade financing. And the other part is to actually come up with products and solutions for green projects to be realized, both domestically, but also internationally, of course, because that is our main mission. So we work with green credits and loans, and we have actually divided sort of the challenge. So we have guided green credits into the transformation of the industry, the export industry in Sweden. So today there are two types of state green credits sort of available for big industrial products for transformation. And that one part is served by the EKN, and that is credits up to $50 million. And then we have the Swedish National Debt Office, which will provide green guarantees for projects above $50 million. And this SEK, the Swedish Export Credit Guarantee, Swedish Export Credit Corporation, that's us, the bank, we will provide green loans for that. And coming up, and we're working on it, is a green export credit sort of directed to international trade. Next slide, please. So one important step we took sort of 2 years ago was to set up a scientific climate council. We realized that we need to understand more, and there's a lot of gray zones, both if you look at sort of the transition agenda, but also you need to sort of look into the development agenda as well. So there's a lot of goal conflicts that we need to understand better, and we need also to connect our own roadmap to the best science available. So we set up this scientific climate council consisting of very high profile professors in the climate area in Sweden. And we have meetings with them 2 or 3 times every year. And we discuss difficult issues on a strategic level, not on a transaction level. So we're not guided by them for a transaction, but we need them as a knowledge resource. And we also disclose the notes from these meetings. Next slide, please. And to summarize a little bit about sort of the key takeaways we've had so far, we have discussed fossil fuel mainly because we thought that was sort of a very gray area for us to what sort of pace should we move away from fossil fuel, and how should we approach the whole subject. And their message really, and that surprised us a little bit, I must say, is that they really are very clear upon that there are little room for fossil-based investments going forward. And that is not only from a responsibility sort of perspective, it's also on an economically perspective. So they always emphasize sort of the economic drivers. They realize that there will be sort of a time where we cannot move away too quickly due to sort of a development sort of perspective that we see. For instance, there are some countries that really need sort of to hold on to some of those fossil fuel sort of based energy systems. But they really sort of stress that doing that is due to institutional and political lock-ins, basically. It's not economically justifiable to actually sort of hold on to these fossil-based energy systems, and that will move away on an economic basis going forward. So that was a little bit of a surprise for us, actually. Next slide, please. I also would like to mention that the government has taken an initiative called Fossil-Free Sweden to actually create roadmaps within the industry. This is an industry-led, but it's a governmental initiative to make the different industries fossil-free. And this is based on industrial collaborations across value chains in many sectors. For instance, the building industry, the steel industry, and so on and so forth. And they have come up with 22 roadmaps based with all these companies working in the different sectors. And these roadmaps needs to be financed. So this year we have also taken forward a financing strategy where the export credit system now is a really great part where we sort of move the export financing sort of success story, I must say, inwards to actually transform the Swedish industry to become climate neutral and also more competitive, we think. Next slide, please. Just like to mention just a little bit about the EU taxonomy, because we base what we call green. We base that on the EU taxonomy. And the reason we're doing that is because this is coming into the regulations. We have really no choice. But we have a dilemma because, well, some business, half of our business will be within the EU, but most of it will be outside. And how do we cope with that? We think that there will be a more global taxonomy for green, but it's not there yet. So we actually use the EU taxonomy, which we think is the best sort of scientific approach on sort of marking economic activity green. But we use it sort of adjusted to the context in another country outside the EU. So we use the ambition and spirit of the EU taxonomy, and we think that works actually. And then we have the do no significant harm, where we think the export sort of global coalition or OECD sort of cooperation has done quite a bit. So there we think the export credits are well positioned. Next slide, please. So I just finalized with a few conclusions that we presented for the export finance for the future. We think is important going forward for export finance. And that is, we need to really future-proof our business models. And now we're talking about the export credit agencies and institutions around the world. We need to future-proof ourselves. There is a tangible risk that the banking industry will go further and will go faster, and that will leave us with a portfolio that is not as green as the bank's portfolio. We have a responsibility for the export industry, but we need to engage in the export industry to make them transform, as banks are doing with the rest of sort of companies in Sweden, for instance. We need to use a science-based approach. We think that is absolutely key, and use the most sort of best available scientific approach there is. And also, we try to state that we need to modernize the OECD rules, which are very important and govern really export financing throughout the world. We need to modernize that. So sort of we need to do it fast because the banking industry is moving quite fast now. Thank you so much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Johan. That was magnificent. I think it's true to say what we often lack in Australia is any kind of detailed understanding of, if you like, the layers underneath the policy. And I found some very good questions to ask you later on. I'd now like to invite Adam Rowe to stand to the podium and provide us with his view of the Australian paradigm of these ideas.
Fantastic, thank you, Bill, and thank you again for the invitation to share our thoughts. I think it's an extremely exciting, interesting, and challenging sector to be involved in. Something that I had no idea about 22, 23 years ago when I entered the trade operations field and we were looking at guarantees and letters of credit. I didn't think I'd be talking about carbon deals and sustainable supply chains. Here at CBA, we're, as Bill was saying from the outset, we're spending a lot of time looking at how we as an institution can assist with this transition period. I think it's vitally important that we act as a good corporate citizen, but also act as a facilitator of generating as many opportunities and solutions as possible. So actually, we're a brand new department within the bank. We came into existence and in February of this year, and it was really the combination of the existing commodities and trade business, which was a combination of vanilla trade, traditional trade with our physical commodities capabilities, and was really a meshing of goals and objectives with carbon. So it was really bringing out how we're going to assist the carbon and the carbon transition to the forefront, and how we're going to use certain components of our department to really facilitate that. So what I've there's Alex Toon is the executive general manager of our department, and when speaking in relation to the case study, which I'll refer to later in my presentation, he was being very forthright in relation to where he saw CBA's role, and by extension my department's role as trade finance. As I said again, it's quite interesting to talk to my team. Trade finance is a cornerstone of most of the businesses that we deal with, cornerstone of banking as we know it. But it's probably one of those departments that kind of is in a bank, but it's in the corner, and it just continues to work within the process, but probably doesn't get the Hollywood films about it, or those kind of aspects. It's really actually, I find it quite key and quite telling that now when we start talking about sustainability and green and carbon, we are talking about trade finance, and the bank is seeing that trade finance is really going to be the driver of these solutions for our clients and into the Australian economy, and then building that out within the region. So apologies, my slides are a little busy. A bit like Bill, I started and then just kept on adding and adding and adding. So as I say, apologies, they are busy, but very happy to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. And thank you, Johan, for providing that in relation to a European context, and hopefully I can give you a little bit of an Australian or an Australian regional aspects in relation to what we're thinking about with respect to financing sustainable supply chains. Sorry, whoops. I seem to have, there we go. Apologies for that. So when we talk about trade finance, we talk about it in three kind of concepts within CBA. One being traditional trade, documentary trade, one being supply chain, and one being structured trade. So we have three silos, three focuses in relation to trade finance, and then, as I say, extension, how that deals with our commodities and carbon colleagues. What I found quite interesting is within many institutions, trade finance is always considered a high risk department, and more in relation to its exposure to supply chains, to trading cycles, to regions, to sanctions, operational risk, and so forth. But if you really dive into the detail, in fact, trade finance is a relatively low risk solution in relation to international trade. And it's actually quite interesting, and I use these statistics quite often talking internally, because there's a difference between high risk in relation to operations and aspects such as sanctions and so forth, and risk in relation to default or problems in relation to those aspects. And I like to really kind of differentiate them. And I think through the kind of external shocks we've had, and 2020 or 19, 20, 21, 22, we've had a number, particularly in relation to trade finance, and most notably COVID-19, but also now leading into the Ukrainian issue. They are really putting pressure on supply chains, putting pressure on trade cycles, And it's really where we're seeing, solutions that we provide come to forefront. And I think a really interesting statistic produced by the ICC is that, in fact, last year, there was roughly between 80 to 90% of world trade was transacted through trade finance. So transacted through a banking institution or a non-bank financial institution that's providing trade finance solutions, whether they be traditional documentary trade or structured trade or supply chain. And I think where we talk about the value add in relation to trade finance, that's where we really come to the value proposition. So out of those numbers in relation to trade, we're talking about warehouse financing, pre-export financing, and what we specialise at CBA in relation to borrowing base lending. So I think that then has put a greater emphasis upon us as a structuring team, as a solution provider, to really work out and decide in relation to what we're going to do about designing supply chains or designing solutions for those supply chains. And inevitably, in relation to what's happened recently, sustainability is at the forefront. Sustainability is a major factor, a major talking point in relation to what we would do sitting in front of customers, whether they be small farming, small family farms, through to corporate farms, through to manufacturing SMEs, to institutional and corporate clients. And I think it's as I've said in the slide, it's an opportunity to structure solutions to those supply chains which involve environmental objectives, which really want to go to reducing waste, reducing component parts, reducing packaging, which will reduce the pressure and enhance efficiencies as we see it in relation to recycling efforts that are part of that sustainability. And I think if you connect the operational excellence in relation to companies' processes and policies and practices with sustainability, I think that's where we can really drive measurable progress in relation to the carbon transition. When we look at sustainable supply chain, and I've purposely put it down at 3 o'clock in my slide, but everyone talks about potential to lowering funding costs. Yes, there's always the potential to lower funding costs, become more efficient, but we don't see that as the major driving force in relation to embracing sustainable supply chains. We see any number of aspects which have as much a priority and have as much of an impact on a company's balance sheet and obviously bottom line. And I've listed a couple there which we talk about when we're talking to, as I say, it would be a farmer in Wagga, or a grain trader in Melbourne or Sydney, or a mining company in regional Queensland. So we're really talking about aligning corporate strategy to a more sustainable future. We all recognise it, and I think as we've discussed previously in these presentations, it really is, I see as businesses pushing forward in relation to those kind of strategies. We as CBA have a very comprehensive ESG policy which we've released this year, which drives how we operate for ourselves as an institution, but also how we drive and how we operate in conjunction with our clients. And I think that then links into funding, linking funding, what I provide on a day-to-day basis, linking that into social goals, into sustainability outcomes, and also targets. By doing that, from a corporate aspect, you improve your market appetite in relation to funding and diversification. You deliver on market expectations. You're able to highlight sustainability credentials. You then, by using that, you can then leverage your existing reporting or develop additional reporting, which then leads, again, probably coming back to where I fit into it, you then start managing stakeholder engagement and producing those discussions and really driving change in relation to those businesses, but also throughout supply chains. It is you start looking at scope 1, 2, and 3. We're talking about what are our clients, suppliers doing? What are our clients, suppliers, stakeholders doing in relation to ESG and sustainability? So for us, it's a holistic approach in relation to a supply chain, whether that be up or down the supply chain. We find ourselves usually in the middle, really financing agricultural, mining, or some levels of oil and gas, but really looking at that kind of institutional side of whether they be the 3 pillars of soft and hard commodities. this is a slide that we produce for our clients in really talking about what we provide as a team, and I've actually just amended it slightly just to reflect something which we've been very proud of internally. We believe we are at least the first domestic financial institution to approve across the board, and I mean there's 23 products there across the board for the whole of trade finance offering to be approved for use with sustainable and green opportunities. We put a lot of effort the back end of last year and into the new year to really go through our product development, through our governance processes, linking it in with our new ESG policy. And we're very proud to advertise wherever we can that we've had the ability to have every single product that we provide as a trade solution ticked off in relation to being able to be provided to support sustainable and green utilisation. So whether it be a letter of credit, whether it be receivables financing, or whether it be a borrowing base, which I'll talk to in a moment, it's actually been a really game-changing approval process within the institution internally, but then also our ability to compete with our domestic peers, but also internationally. In relation to supply chain, we see supply chain requirements everywhere. And we really see it as dovetailing with existing projects and initiatives, whether they be land-based, whether they be industry and transport. Take the drive to EV buses. We see that as a supply chain opportunity because you can talk about how the batteries are produced, the metals, the base metals, the rare earths to go into those batteries, how we look at charging, how we look at the chassis, whether the chassis need to come in from internationally, as some of them do, how they built them, how they're then added on locally, and then how you process that through to being delivered to state bus companies or so forth. And that's just one example of what we see as a bit of a wider. Okay, everyone wants to go for electronic, EV buses. Great initiative, but we also then want to see outside of that and how we can then assist with that supply chain. The same with farming, the same with land and sea transport, the same with soil carbon. Alternative waste treatment at the moment is actually being something which we are looking at very closely in relation to how we can assist alternative waste projects in relation to the capture and the generation of ACCUs, and how we can then assist clients to monetize those ACCUs and provide that for the bank itself, but also then for other clients who have carbon credit accumulation requirements. So it is very wide. It's very exciting. It's a new initiative that is getting our bankers and our other stakeholders, whether that be from risk or from credit, really you're thinking outside of the box, thinking about what they are actually seeing, or hey, I saw a forestry project application a couple of weeks ago. Is there an ability to put that into a supply chain or into a sustainability or green or carbon initiative? So we're seeing a lot of cross-pollination internally, which we don't see very often, or we haven't seen historically in relation to certain aspects. And we're really seeing, catching people's imaginations, whether that be from our business banking, from our major client group, from our agricultural departments, or also from our institutional banking coverage partners. What I really want to talk about in relation to the case study, which is the really nuts and bolts of the success story over the last 3 to 6 months, is really delivering existing products. And that's what's so good about trade finance, or what's so good at what I see the benefits of trade finance. Trade finance products have been in existence for a number of years. We all know it. We've got the ICC, we've got any number of governing guidelines and processes in place. But if you look at the delivery of those products, the actual solutions, they are purpose built for building out the capturing and the supporting of sustainability and green. So for us, it's about, okay, yes, we have been doing this already. We may not have recognised it, or there may not have been the emphasis to highlight those requirements. Sustainable guarantees in relation to renewable business, the supporting of wind farms or solar farms with the delivery of letters of credit, which will support the import of raw materials and manufactured goods. So the product's already there. It's just looking at them in a different way and seeing with our sustainability colleagues and with the clients whether we can structure them in a way that provides them with the best ability to capture the benefits of sustainability and so forth. So really a borrowing base is something which we've selected as our kind of core product. It's a structured product, so it provides the ability to take a counterparty's collateral, their whole working capital solution, whether that be cash in a bank, whether it be inventory that they have, whether it be inventory which is completed, inventory which is in a raw process, or also inventory which is work in progress, and then combining that with their receivables, because obviously we're looking at working capital flow. We're looking at materials coming in, being produced, being manufactured, and then being sold, and then having that whole process, the ability for a counterparty to use that as their collateral base, to use as for us the ability to lend off the back of. So borrowing bases for us is subject matter expert. The team are very focused in delivering that, and that's where we see the best bang for buck in relation to our sustainability focus within trade finance. So something we know well, something which can be structured to meet a particular customer's requirements. It can be amended in relation to percentages and so forth. So for us, it's really a really beneficial and strong solution that we're leading in the domestic Australian market. What that also allows us to do is then focus on their working capital trade cycle, which may include the domestic market, but then also goes to the international capabilities. Australia being an export-driven market, particularly where we play and where we deal with counterparties in the agricultural sector. And we're seeing significant market dynamics in the favour of Australian producers. We've had a fantastic summer grains harvest, even with the weather events we had on the east coast, which has kept it raining for feels like ever. But like you're linking that in with a high volume in relation to a significant harvest with high prices, with the volatility which is occurring. So we've had a really good summer, Australian summer, and now we're going to be moving into the Northern Hemisphere summer, which is usually dominated by the US and the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is unfortunately experiencing some issues. And there's 29% of the market. So that's a really good story for Australian producers and the ability to support them moving, what is commonly considered, high premium, the ability to build off local sustainability practices, and in marketing and assisting them for our Australian farmers, assisting marketing Australian grain to other areas which traditionally would have been dominated by the Black Sea. So for us, the dynamics of the market have actually worked in the favour of Australian farmers and the Australian farming and agricultural sector. So here's the case study which links into the borrowing base. And I think this is a really fantastic story. This is a long-standing client who is a global leader in the origination, handling, and marketing of wheat and grains and oilseeds. And was one of Australia's largest grain traders. They had an existing borrowing base, which CBA had structured for them a couple of years ago. And we went to them, and they were also thinking about the same time and said, is there an ability to implement some sustainability goals and objectives within that borrowing base? They were very excited about the opportunity. And what we've been able to do is to be able to lift the borrowing base. It is a syndicated facility with 10 other financial institutions. CBA has led it, has overseen the implementation, and what we're really doing there is allowing the customer to commit to supporting sustainable practices. Now, whether that be domestically or internationally, and then tying its cost of capital, so what it's costing for their financing, back to the performance with agreed sustainability targets, and over the length of the period of the facility, so 4 years. So that target, it focuses on grower engagement with the ISCC, purchasing ISCC certified Australian grown grain. In this instance, it was canola, and securing protein for the import into Australia that is sourced from overseas farms that follow the similar processes which are ISCC certified. So it's really pushing capital cost, funding requirements, the appetite of the market with, so achievable and measurable targets, which we saw as a significant success for both the client and also for the banking institutions which were part of that. CBA is 1 of 10. So it operates exactly the same as the existing facility. So they're using the grain, the canola that they purchase from ISCC certified farmers domestically or internationally. They're using that as a pool of collateral to facilitate further funding, which then goes into purchasing more certified Australian grain or more certified international grains and protein. So it's an ability to get the process running. It starts with domestic. It starts with the initiation of the facility, but then they're getting greater benefits for focusing their purchasing, their accumulation programs on ISCC certified grain. So as I say, whether that be domestically or internationally. So the greater emphasis on the focusing on the certification and being able to measure that certification and measure how much of their total accumulation is linked to that certification, then provides them with a cheaper form of funding. It becomes a beneficial circle. It's benefit because we're encouraging farmers to be sustainable. We're encouraging farmers to have ISCC certification, and we're encouraging that by using their biggest counterparty, their biggest stakeholder, the grain trader, and also then linking that in. So it's a benefit for the grain trader. It's a benefit for the farming sector. So the facility, and this is the best news of it. The facility was used to purchase in excess of 2.4 billion worth of grain from Australian growers over the summer harvest. So that's ensuring that there is hard dollars going back into farmers who are harvesting in a sustainable and measurable way. So it was for them and for the farmers, it was a win-win. On the right-hand side of the slide, I've just outlined aspects in relation to the ISCC certification. Obviously, those in the know would be aware of it, but it really, for us, we see it as a cornerstone, and we're looking to build out further in relation to our financing, particularly in agriculture, in relation to, as we said. So it's helping all participants in the supply chain in relation to reduction of greenhouse gases, sustainable land use, which is where we're really focusing with the agricultural sector here in Australia, the protection of natural biospheres, and the increase of the social sustainability. So for us, it's been a really game-changing solution, which was originated, negotiated, executed, and implemented within that kind of framework of what is our focus, what is our key driver in relation to ESG and sustainability. And that was looking at a supply chain, looking at one of our biggest customers and saying, we want to partner with you, and we want to assist with the process and the implementation and the integration of sustainable practices through the sector. It wouldn't be a slide, or you wouldn't have an invitation from a banker without providing a little bit of advertising from my institution. Obviously, whilst my department is new as the combination of commodities and trade and carbon, CBA's participation and emphasis and interest in the carbon market has been long-standing, and we continue to be a key player here domestically, but also in California and also in Europe. And we have teams here focusing on carbon here domestically in Sydney, and we also have a team that looks for the North American market and Europe out of London. So it is key to us. It is just, I think, the acknowledgement this year that we're bringing the C of carbon up front and really pushing that. We're looking at commodities, trade and carbon as all of an intertwined, integrated with synergies across supply chains in relation to customers, in relation to our participation with other financial institutions, and also with governments. Apologies for the photos. There's the team, myself as the head, and my colleague Harry, who is a structured trade and supply chain specialist, and we wouldn't be anywhere in relation to our product development and building out these kind of sustainable solutions without kind of a hand-in-glove approach with our COO team, who are really the product managers and developers. So I'm very happy and very proud to talk about and discuss how kind of our collective push to drive out these solutions from a sustainable supply chain and also a green and carbon initiative. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Adam. I take it the check is in the mail for the advertising slot, but
thank you very much.
We'll deal with that later. Obviously, we've got, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but we've got the chat. We've got the chat open for.
We've got the question and answer open.
Yeah.
So if anyone's got questions, they can type in the questions, and I can read them out, or the panel.
Yeah, we'll do that, but I'll use my prerogative as chair to ask a couple up front, because I was, of course, fascinated by the two approaches. Obviously, Johan is coming from a perspective of an economy-wide process, and that, of course, engenders standardised, what I'll call currency, and I mean by that generally recognised credits and policy settings. Adam, you're in the absence of those broader settings, you are preparing a set of initiatives, obviously informed by what's happening elsewhere in the world, but you're doing it on the basis of a lending entity. And I think it was very clear from the two presentations the differences that has driven. But I'm very curious, I mean, taking on board your case study, Adam, and your comments, Johan, about a little room for fossil-based investments. Tell me, gentlemen, is it carrot or stick? Are you effectively punishing carbon production generated trade, or alternatively, are you giving benefits to green trade, or is it something else? Maybe Adam, you can start. Yeah,
I'm happy to kick off. I think that's a really interesting point, Bill. I think at the moment we are certainly in the carrot stage. It is really, and I'm actually pleased to see that a number of our larger counterparties are really ahead of this process. Have really engaged, whether they be parts of the oil and gas sector, or probably more importantly, more focus for me as part of the agricultural sector, is they are seeing the benefits, and they're seeing the requirements of it. So at the moment, as I said in my slides, we're really talking about the question of providing you with lower financing. So it's a carrot, it's an enticement. But there's going to be a tipping point when we're going to get close to, whether it be 2025, 2020, 2030, in relation to different institutions' goals. There is, I believe, there's going to be a situation where that's going to flip. It's going to become the new normal. So it's going to be a situation where you are going to have a sustainable supply chain solution rather than being offered one. So it'll be a situation where if you're not embracing that, that's where you're going to have a higher rate of financing, and internally, institutions won't be providing the benefits that you get from capital treatment and so forth. So I think there will be a tipping point. At the moment, it's about getting them moving, but I think sooner or later it will flip.
Johan, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the question is very, very interesting. Is it carrot or is it a stick? I think sustainable finance in general is like promoting green projects with financing. And it's moving away from fossil fuel sort of over time. And it's the third part, which is most important, and which I think Adam is sort of a proof of, is like engaging in clients to actually provide them with financing to be able to, over time, make the transition. Because if we don't do that as financiers, we will end up with an industry which is either green or not exist. Because so we need to be a little bit of a patient, and I'm afraid maybe we will not be that. Once the capital markets are sort of adhering to the climate neutral economy and all the transition risks that some companies would sit with, I think there's a real danger that the market, the financial market, or the pricing of the markets will actually start to punish fossil related sort of businesses sooner than we actually would need. So I think we have maybe I talk against myself here, but I think it's important to realize that fossil fuels is not economically justifiable long term, because we're moving into a climate neutral economy, and that the financing will be more expensive for that type of businesses, and greenhouse gas accounting will be an important step for banks and fund managers to actually select. So they will actually demand that type of regulation, and the financial actors will actually demand greenhouse gas accounting from companies. And for the first time ever, we will have a user of that type of information. We didn't have that before. The information was there, but now we have a user, and that's the financial markets. So there's a real risk, not sort of, we need to engage in all these types of perspective of the transformation, but it's a real risk. It will go faster than sort of what we actually need.
It's
Sorry, excuse me, Bill.
interesting comment that you've made. It's I had arguments about pricing externalities about 40 years ago when I was first at university. So it's curious that it has been staved off for so long. Ben and Marion.
The question,
please.
Bill. Helen Labus has asked, how do universities go about educating people about green trade? Johan, maybe you might want to answer that.
I can answer that. The universities are lagging. There's been a few articles actually in Sweden that economic students, they are sort of, the students themselves are writing these articles that they need more of sustainability sort of education, how that will sort of, how sustainability will connect with the field of economics. And that's really lacking. Now we have a few master programs. For instance, at the university where I am at, Örebro University, we have a master sort of program for sustainability and sustainable financing. But it's really in its beginnings, and I think that's a field that needs to progress very fast, because they are not separate fields anymore. They're coming together.
Bill, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Bill.
Bill, you're on mute.
I was apologising for talking so much, but I've got to ask the audience and everyone else. It appears to me that the real flaw in this is the understanding of factors of production, because quite frankly, the economic consequences of water pollution, land pollution, and air pollution are direct and immediate. Particularly in areas such as agriculture, etc. You can see the difference in crops that are affected. It's a curiosity to me that we find ourselves in a circumstance where we're having to justify this.
So Bill, I might have a question which I can put to the two panelists.
Please.
So the sort of increasing focus on ESG with a focus on social outcomes. I'm just wondering, I see, Johan, that you have a socially linked loan, and I'm just wondering how that works. The EU, as you might see, is starting to look at a social taxonomy as part of its financial and environmental objectives, and as the ESG world is also focusing on the S a bit more than it has in the past. Obviously, the environmental piece is being looked at. So I'm just wondering, what do you encompass in that? Because that affects supply chains, clearly. So just wondering.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last sentence. Sorry, I didn't catch the last
I was just wondering if you could expand a bit out on what that instrument that you have provides as a socially linked loan, and where you choose, what are the indicators, if you like, of social outcomes.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about the different types of green products or the sustainability products we do have. And I must say that there are two types. The one type is when you label the use of proceeds, either social or green. And that is, you need to see the economic activity in itself. Is it green or is it social? And there we have the EU taxonomy, which is now we have two sort of green objectives that we can fulfill to name it green. And that is climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. And they are working on 4 new goals like biodiversity and things like that. And these are really sort of the European bureaucracy in its sort of shit. It's 1,000 pages. So you really need to stick to that. And they are also working on a social sort of purpose or goal to be fulfilled, to be called a social loan or social bond. So you need to really use that. But that is use of proceeds. And then we have the other, which I think is more interesting, and that is sustainability-linked bonds and sustainability-linked loans. And that is that you give a loan for the corporate itself. It's not sort of an economic activity in itself. It's for the general corporate purposes. And then you want to see a shift. I think that's a little bit what Adam is working with, engaging to set up sustainability goals. And they need to sort of fulfill that goal in order to have a lower interest rate. If they do not fulfill the goals, they will have a higher interest rate. So that is sustainability-linked loan, and that has become so popular among our clients because they really want to do the change, and they need to be punished. They want to be punished. That's strange, but they also want to be sort of favored if they actually could reach these sort of more corporate-wide sustainability goals, and that is both climate and social goals. Normally 2 or 3 different types of goals, and when we actually apply that on a export credit basis, that is sort of a trade basis, we really see the most fantastic projects that we want to be able to call socially sort of progressive. That is water projects in Africa, that is sun projects in Africa. There are various of fantastic projects where it is really needed, and the sort of the effects are enormously important. Was that answering your question? I don't know. I lost.
Extensive. Bin, do we have any more questions from the audience?
There was a comment from Alan thanking Johan for his answer. His comment is, it seems like there is an opportunity for trade industry to engage with academic researchers to develop the needed education material that is required.
Well, we haven't, a precursor to that is something that we haven't really touched on, and that's the process of standardization. In my introduction, I noted that the general conclusions across all authors and institutions was that we need standards. So what should those standards be? I can see there's the creeping effect of commercial transmission, I'll call it that, where if you want to trade with us or you want to trade with my business, then we impose these kinds of requirements on someone who's taking up our tenders, someone who wants to be in our procurement panel, and so it goes and so it goes. And that's a strong movement in Australia, but it's fragmented. And I get thoroughly frightened by the idea of 8 different standards, 8 different methods. Okay, you can't meet mine. Over there is different. Go and try them. Something has to happen. What is that?
Well, Adam, please, or shall I start?
Yeah,
I think we need a global standard. That's the base. I think that is coming up. The US and China, they are working on a global standard for such as the taxonomy, and I think we really need that. We need a common language, because the reason why the EU taxonomy was actually created was that we realized that there was so much greenwashing from the banks and the financial institutions side, because there were like 40% of the asset under management was called green. And we know that is not the case. So we need a standard that is scientifically connected, the best we know at least. And we need to have a common scientific sort of view of what type of economic activity will lead to the fulfillment of the Paris Agreement. And that needs to be sort of adapted to different contexts. Very difficult, for instance, for India to have the same sort of type of initiatives as Sweden. We are totally different. So we need to apply the same scientific sort of based methodology in various contexts.
Do you find, sorry, Adam, before you answer, do you expect that to be a tiered approach? Because some of the naysayers around climate action talk about the amount of pollution and carbon that's pumped in the air by various developing and other nations who have a range of sophistication within their economies. Do you see there being ranges of compliance with this, or is it an absolute standard? Adam, what do you think?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was a question to Johan. Sorry. Yeah, I think for us it is a question of consistency. I agree wholeheartedly. If you look at part of the complexity that we find in implementing these types of strategies is that, yeah, the question is, okay, who do we use to measure? So obviously in the domestic market, Bill, there's yourselves and your consulting peers who are seeing this as another bow to their armory, and what we're internally in CBA, but I'm sure other institutions is thinking, okay, is there ability to use the data that we collect, in relation to, as example, trade finance. There's a huge amount of data that we get on customers, on supply chains, on their suppliers, on their buyers, on the flows, timing, certain harvest conditions, inputs in relation to such as fertilizer and so forth. So there's a huge amount of data which it could be used to actually to refine and to build out these types of standardized measuring capabilities. And so again, we've looked at the ISCC as a first step. We're looking, within the ICC, we've been talking, with other institutions in relation to how you use data to benefit, to develop those standardized terms. But I think Johan's right. You're going to have a greater input from some probably of the larger the larger economies who you are going to drive. This is what that standard is, and this is what that standard is, and then how that becomes a blended approach from first world versus developing and so forth.
Marion, do you have any views on the standardisation process? I mean, it is easy to discuss things in terms of, the bookends of global economies, being the EU, the US, as being where we would normally look to these kinds of things. Is there my mind though goes to the UN environmental program and other sources of insight into these matters?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, there's sort of a global level, and the common taxonomy that's being developed. But there is an initiative that is about to start in Australia to start developing an Australian sustainable finance taxonomy. So I think referencing that global level, but then looking at, the sort of science basis and the sort of national context. So I think your plea is being answered, and that's sort of being developed. And I assume people like CBA, et cetera, are involved in that.
Bill, I've got one more question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. So Alan has asked, do you think that the transference of risk will be a problem where organisations apply one approach in one country, but less sustainable approach in other countries?
Johan, I might ask you to have a go at this, because I think you mentioned in your presentation about the EU taxonomy being followed quite heavily, but a high percentage of trade was in non-EU jurisdictions. And, what does that mean? Does that mean you have a bifurcated approach? Does it mean if you're a big global, you have multiple approaches, as often is the case with the various requirements of free trade agreements? How do you see it working? Is it going to be easy just to take the high ground and leave it at that?
We discussed that quite a bit, actually, and I don't see it as a huge problem. There are some gray zones, but for instance, if you have a solar project, it's green everywhere in the world. If you have a water project, which will sort of contribute for people to actually get clean water, it will be socially beneficial everywhere in the world, I guess. But I mean, that's not the need in Sweden. But I think that most projects could quite easily fit into what we need. We need sort of renewable energy. That's what we need. We need a sustainable transport system. That could actually be a little bit problematic, because there are, for instance, there will not be sufficient electricity in some countries, so you can actually use that. You need to have so what we have in the EU taxonomy is that there will be a step-by-step approach. So up until 2025, some hybrid solutions will be allowed, but after that it will be not. And that 2025 maybe will be 2035 in India, I don't know. So yes, there is a problem, but I think banks and financial institutions need to actually understand those matters much better, and then explain what we do. And then we can use transparency in a good way. We can say that these things are definitely green, and these things we have sort of our own methodology to actually do that. As long as we are transparent in how we do that, I don't see that as a problem.
So does ESG then have to start with the money? Because it seems to me that your only chance of bringing on board multiple banks to a process that seems to be quite extensive, headcount intensive, and I think you spoke about risky trade at the start, Adam, possibly uncertain, is through profitability. And I've been pondering all through this, not so much with your organisation, Johan, because it's got a policy purpose, but Adam, how do you make a buck in this?
I don't want to sound. I don't want to sound like I'm arguing against my banking brethren, but I was actually serious when I was talking to my slide about, okay, lower cost of funding is one part of a much larger pie. I think it is going to be a situation where banks that are going to have, they're going to be amended capital arrangements. There's going to be amended audit requirements. Whether we have another Basel X, Y, and Z in relation to how institutions book internally. And I mean, I think they're going to be the drivers for us as an institution. It's fine. Funding is going to be the issue. How I efficiently use my funding is going to be important. But there, as you see with many other instances, there is a social aspect. There's an activist aspect to some of the interactions, and you're going to have a lot more, I believe, a lot more emphasis to drive towards being able to say, and some of these aspects that I raised are also imperative to me. Yeah, stakeholder management, the internal focus in the market for CBA or Adam Rowe as the head of trade. Are we going to be able to market more borrowing bases like we have? And that was put on LinkedIn. It was through the newspapers. It was, we were patting ourselves on the back. But it is an aspect of moving forward that discussion of, yes, we're not just here looking for the bottom line. We are saying there has to be an ESG component. There needs to be aspects of that push and that support to the transition away from carbon. And I think banks and institutions who are able to have a significant portfolio and a variety of products to meet certain requirements of certain counterparties, I think are going to be successful, Bill. And those who don't are going to find themselves restricted by capital requirements, by government regulation, by audit requirements, and so forth. So I think it is too simplistic to say it's about cost. I think there are other elements, in particularly in relation to an institution like I work in, which is significantly large. There's the amount of discussions at committee meetings, at board meetings in relation to, okay, Adam, but how is that linking into modern slavery? How is that linking into our commitment to furthering social responsibility? How is that in relation to minimising deforestation? Natural habitats for orangutans or elephants or rhinoceroses. So there are those questions which are being discussed, not just like how much money we're going to make from this deal. And I think that's an important differentiation to make.
So we're introducing and treating, from what you've said, a new form of risk in if you like, the setting of an interest rate.
Yeah, it's the risk of not doing it, I suppose. And there are more. I think as we move through the process, there are even the discussions that I have within my team. We constructively challenge each other. Should we be doing this? Are we right on doing that? How can we build out greater capacity? We are all impacted. I mean, just take the microcosm of what's happened on the east coast of Australia over the last 3 or 4 months. People cannot, I think, Adam Rowe's opinion, seriously argue that there is not a change in the climate. I mean, this is the wettest that I've seen it ever. And that's going to have greater impacts, flood, people with insurance, people building on floodplains who will unable to be living there in a number of years. So that also then places stress on supply chains. It places stress on workforces in those supply chains. We've seen there's significant constraints from a lot of counterparties, a lot of customers, not so much about the economic conditions. It's about that they're unable to have people come to their offices because they've been flooded, or the supply chain has been disrupted because their logistics shed has been swept away, or those kind of aspects, Bill. So I think it's going to be a much wider concept in relation to what we do in relation to our levels of capital and where we direct those capital for the most efficient use for the bank, but also for our shareholders and so forth.
Johan, is that how business sees it in Sweden?
Sorry?
Does business understand these same features in Sweden?
Yeah, I definitely think we do, actually, and we have a lot of cooperation with a lot of the industry, so to speak. And we also see some sort of effects of climate change already. So it's a real risk, a physical risk for businesses. But there will be the main risk will be the transition risks, at least in Europe, because the regulation is moving so fast now. So we need to take that into account in our credit approval processes. But I totally agree with what you say here, Adam, and I think it's very interesting to hear. I'd like to sort of put a perspective on how you could see risks and rewards for banks to actually work with this. And it's not like so much that we usually do. We look at risks on a transaction level. This is a risk mainly on the portfolio level. And if you want to transform your portfolio to become more green, you need to have that perspective, because you can't track that in each transaction that you do, because that will then not add up to a portfolio that you will want to have in a sort of moving fast towards a climate neutral sort of economy. So you need to sort of have that more broader view of sustainability and economics and financial risks, I guess.
So it's systemic in nature. Marion, would you like to say some final words on the topic before we wrap up?
No, I'm fine. It's been a really interesting sort of session to hear about both the sort of the public perspective and the portfolio perspective, but also the way in which Adam and his clients and colleagues sort of deal with it in terms of a particular corporate climate and industry sector. So I'd like to thank both of you for a very interesting session.
So again, in my role as chair of professionals in trade, I would like to thank all the speakers for, we've been blessed with incredible insights. As I've said at the start, I haven't really found gritty examples of digging down into this topic, but today we've achieved that, and I think I'll step out of line and say it's a first for Australia. So I thank you, Johan, for participating, and I thank you, Adam, for joining the podium with the local examples, and of course Marion. Thank you, Ben, for your superb administration, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, the Professionals in International Trade promotes these events for the purposes that I stated at the start. We have many of them through the year. We seek to be the first, we seek to be the best, and I urge you to join our not-for-profit organisation and become part of the education, the networks, and the broader relationships. On that note, I thank you very much for your attendance, and keep an eye out for our next event.